we've all made fashion choices that we regret. Although I still think the combination of tights, socks, and sandals will make a comeback. But the great thing is, we live in an era where we don't have to live with these choices for long. There's an abundance of clothes options. In fact, Americans spend about $2,000 a year on clothes. That's about 70 items. And that also means we throw out a lot of clothes. But I'm sure, like me, many of you try to recycle your clothing. Well, the problem is that because of current technology, most of our clothing can't be recycled. So about 85% of it ends up in landfills. And that's about 110 pounds of clothes per person per year. And many of these clothes are made from polymers and plastics called polyesters that can make microplastics that leach into the land and the water around where they are in landfills. And even more unfortunately, these clothes are not in our backyard. We ship most of them to the developing world. So we've shipped hundreds of millions of tons of clothing to the global south, while in the global north, we continue to enjoy the ability to shop whenever we want. And because of lack of infrastructure in many of these nations, we end up polluting water, air, and land. In fact, about 30% of microplastics in the ocean are from clothing. So I don't mean to make you feel bad. And I know shopping can be fantastic. Getting that new shirt can give you the confidence to say, stand up here and give a TEDx talk. But what I do want us to consider is how we can rethink recycling to make it more equitable. So the focus of the research in my group is to think about how we can make technologies that aren't equitable, equitable. This is a concept called energy equity. It's the notion that basically disadvantaged populations have been disproportionately impacted by industrialization and the pollution it causes, while being left out of the benefits of much of the technologies that come from that. Our goal is to develop accessible, inexpensive technologies that can be provided to everyone. Not only that, but we seek to achieve justice where we can remediate these prior harms. And the way we take on these somewhat insurmountable tasks is by taking inspiration from natural systems. So pretty much since humans have been making clothing, we've been turning to nature. Shown here is 2,000-year-old armor, and it was inspired by the design of scales of the pangolin. Once humans could look at things on the micro scale, and I'm gonna say, Vlad, you ruined my surprise. This is the microscopic picture of Velcro. And this hook and loop structure is based on what we see on the bottom, which is a burr that can stick to animal fur. Additionally, we've even been able to look at natural systems at the nanoscale. Shown on the top is 3D printed fabric that was used in Olympic swimsuits that have now been banned because they make swimmers too fast. And on the bottom is the inspiration for this, which is shark skin. And the great thing about taking inspiration from these natural systems is that when we look at molecules like the polymers that make up polyesters in our clothing, they have a lot of very similar bonds to things in our bodies. In fact, polyesters that make up, say, this shirt look very similar to things like fats that are found in our arteries. And so the really fantastic thing is, nature has kind of solved this problem for us because it's evolved proteins with specific functions called enzymes that can take things like these fats and degrade them into things we can metabolize. So we can just use these proteins, right? Well, the challenge with using proteins for biotechnology is that they're really expensive and unstable. Proteins can be very temperature sensitive when they're not in their happy little environment in a cell, and they're extremely expensive to produce. You have to tell cells to make them in abundance, then you have to isolate them, purify them, and formulate them, and they still don't last very long. So what we've been able to do in my group is to instead engineer microbes and just tell them to put these proteins on their surface. This allows us to generate proteins with much more stability. We can use these proteins on these microbes up to 80 degrees Celsius. It also gives improved activity. Our enzymes tend to last 10 times or more longer than conventional proteins. Additionally, they're really, really cheap and easy to make. We just program these cells and tell them to put these proteins on the surface. So it costs us about $10 for a kilogram of cells. Not only that, but we can formulate these by freeze drying them using the same processing that we use to make astronaut ice cream, so that these microbes are no longer alive. And so we don't have to worry about feeding them. So we now have these scaffolded proteins that are very inexpensive and stable. So what does this have to do with environmental remediation? Well, this is a platform technology where we can put many different proteins on the surface to degrade different environmental contaminants into benign products. And one of those contaminants we can look at is polyesters, the things that many of our clothes are made out of. And we can take these polyesters and put this protein on the surface that's found in our bodies, and these polyesters get chewed up. And we can actually see this on the macroscopic scale. So what we see in that picture is a 1 centimeter piece of plastic. I've got one right here. After leaving it overnight in water with some of our cells, you can see on the right that we lose about 70% of the mass. And if we leave it for a full week, we get something that looks just like the water it's in. And that's because we are not actually degrading these to microplastics, which would kind of defeat the purpose of recycling, right? We are degrading these to the chemicals that we started with. So we can actually make new polymers out of these. This is a very generalizable technology. We've been able to do this with every polyester material we've tried. And because these microbes are very efficient, it doesn't take a lot of them. This is my last demo, I promise. To degrade this shirt, which was a questionable choice in purchasing, it takes this many cells. This is actual powdered microbes. And we leave it in water for about 2 weeks, and the shirt would be gone. So what else can we do with this? Because there are obviously many other environmental contaminants, right? Well, we've been able to put proteins on the surface of microbes that can degrade pesticides. These are things that act on agricultural workers like chemical warfare agents. And we can degrade them to benign products so that they don't harm these agricultural workers. We've also been able to degrade water treatment byproducts. Obviously, we have to treat water to make it safe to drink. The problem is we also produce chemicals that can methylate our DNA and actually change how our genes are expressed. And these chemicals have been directly linked to increased rates of childhood cancer. We can degrade them into simple gases that are not harmful to anyone. And finally, I'm sure many of you have heard a lot of the recent talk about forever chemicals. These are essential chemicals that are used for things like firefighting and as Teflon. And one of the big debates has been, well, we don't have good replacements for these. Well, we feel like we've solved this problem because we can degrade these to innocuous gases. So now, you don't have to avoid using these chemicals because we can just degrade them when we're finished using them. And finally, the last example I want to talk about is the ability to recover materials from complex solutions that normally we couldn't use. So when we think about environments that could cause contamination in the earth. We often think about things containing heavy metals or lithium, things like battery acid and mine tailings. And the problem is we usually can't use microbes for decontamination because they die in acid or brine or high pH or temperatures, right? Well, the great thing is our microbes aren't alive. So we can stick them in battery acid to pull out lithium or in mine tailings to pull out rare earth elements. And so this allows us to both recover these elements that are critical for us to make electronics while also preventing them from entering water streams and potentially harming ecosystems. And so I hope what you take away from this talk today is that we don't see recycling as an individual problem, and we don't want you to feel like you have to change your habits. We feel that we need to change recycling at a collective scale. If we can degrade everything we find in a landfill down to the starting chemicals, then we basically solve our current waste problem globally in a way that's equitable towards people who have conventionally been burdened with this waste. And with that, if you're interested in learning more about any of the technologies I've talked about, this is my group's website, and thank you.